As most Canadians know, Prime Minister Trudeau stepped down as the leader of Liberal Party on January 6th, following immense pressures from political parties and resignation of the now ex-Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland. Government has been prorogued, and while much remains uncertain, one thing is clear: at some point this year, we will have a new Prime Minister. So Canadians should be happy, right? After years of allegations about a corrupt government, unfair taxes, prioritizing foreign aid over struggling citizens, and navigating crippling inflation, this should be a moment of relief. But are Canadians actually celebrating? The numbers tell a different story. Approval ratings remain low for all three major federal leaders, with each failing to crack 40%. A recent poll shows that only 19% of Canadians were okay with Trudeau not resigning. Meanwhile, a staggering 67% were unhappy with the direction of Canada, 14% remaining unsure. This paints a picture of a nation grappling with dissatisfaction, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of frustration. There's no winning here. We live in an era of information overload. In such a climate, it's easy to mislead, misinform, or distract the public. Many Canadians simply don't have the time to fully grasp complexities of our political landscape. To help cut through some of the noise, I'll be contextualizing a few major political talking points. Each of these would warrant a deep dive. For now, I'll summarize key issues. Let's start with Poilievre, the leader of Conservative Party. According to a December poll, if elections were held today, 46% of voters would vote Conservative. Poilievre is a polarizing figure, to say the least. His supporters admire his sharp wit, snappy one-liners, and promises to prioritize Canadians. They see him as a strong leader steering the country through turbulent waters. But his critics, they'd call him a maven of misinformation, accusing him of focusing more on villainizing Trudeau than offering concrete solutions. So who's right? Well, let's look at some of their disagreements. The federal carbon tax began at $20 per ton, has risen to $50 per ton, with plans to reach $170 by 2030. Poilievre has labeled it as an existential crisis, tying it directly to Canada's rising cost of living. Is carbon tax really to blame for the inflation? According to the Parliamentary Budget Officer's October 2024 report, carbon tax will result in a 0.6 drop in GDP. There will be some loss of jobs. At a fiscal level, though, most Canadians will be okay. Excluding the top 20% earners in a couple of provinces, the average Canadian family will be better off, making more from the rebate than they will lose due to the tax. At the macro level, PBO estimates that the average household may see a net loss when factoring job reductions and rising prices, with higher income earners being more affected. But this does not consider the money saved from having a healthier environment. And there is research to that. Studies show that pollution costs Canada billions annually in healthcare expenses and contribute to thousands of premature deaths. In 2016 alone, it cost Canada an amount equivalent to 6% of its GDP with such costs, according to Health Canada. Addressing emissions can save lives and money long term. So while carbon tax does increase costs, is it really the existential crisis Poilievre paints it to be? Not entirely. Research by the IRPP found that emission-related policies have contributed only 0.5% to consumer price increases since 2019. Instead, global factors like energy price surges and supply chain disruptions bear more responsibility for the inflation. To put this into perspective, let's look at inflation trends. Here is Canada's inflation rate during the Trudeau era. After a dip in 2020, it hit a 40-year high of 6.8% in 2022. But this trend was not unique to Canada. Looking at inflation rates in France and US, we see similar patterns: a drop in 2020 and a peak in 2022 until they come back down again. So what's the reason for this? There was that little thing known as the pandemic. The pandemic drastically slowed down global economies, reducing demand for essentials like food and energy. This caused deflation. Though inflation sounds scary, deflation is not a good thing either. Bank of Canada states that we need to maintain about 2% of inflation yearly to avoid deflation. But going back to the point, when restrictions were lifted and demand surged, so did prices. What looked like a scary inflation rate in 2022 was likely the sign of a recovering economy. Furthermore, inflation rate is now declining, suggesting real recovery. So can we just put all the blame on carbon tax? You decide. All my sources, all my stats, all my references are in the description. You should look at them and decide for yourself, irrespective of your opinion. I actually had a lot more to talk about, like immigration, further opinions on Poilievre's choice of language, and the falls with Trudeau era, and a couple of other things. But this video is already pretty long, but I will make a part 2 on all that stuff, but I want to make a point. I am not anti-Poilievre, not pro-anti-anything. I'm just a Canadian citizen who is worried about the outlook of Canadians right now, and this is a theme I've been trying to make throughout the whole video. It's really important to know that Canadians are upset. Canadians are looking for a fresh change, but this can lead to vulnerability, where a suave, silver-tongued person can take advantage. We should not be looking for anti-Trudeau. We should be looking for a good prime minister. If a politician uses hyperbolic language to fault Trudeau without the context of the pandemic, you have to ask yourself why. We cannot be narrative-driven in this country. We cannot allow narratives to run us. We have to fact-check everything these guys say. So next time you hear Poilievre saying that carbon tax is the reason that we're all gonna go homeless and it's an existential crisis, that's a real quote. He said it's an existential crisis. But